Ready.
Well, good morning, Zion United Church of Christ. This is Krista Kiger, your friend, colleague in ministry. We are at my brother's house, the Cold Weather Shelter building here on the Community Missions campus. And this is Justice Sunday for the United Church of Christ. And I'm really honored to be a part of your worship service today as we seek together to do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with God. Cold Weather Shelter has been in existence for about 20 years, and we are an overflow shelter for the winter months. We have always been a support to the main shelter, especially if they needed overflow capacity for men. And so we are in what is usually the dining room, and where we have would stack our blankets and sheets. And then in here is where men would be set up on cots around the perimeter of the room. Now, earlier this summer, this room became an office in which folks who were street homeless could come and sign up for the census, and also be able to sign up to receive the stimulus checks that were offered as part of the COVID recovery. And I find that an interesting project that we did, and it helps me to hearken back to our gospel lesson for today. Because some people might say, well, why would homeless folk need to get stimulus checks? Well, the stimulus checks were offered to all citizens of the United States, and many people who were working and were laid off definitely benefited from those. Homeless people also benefited from those checks. They were able to get into housing, or at least get some temporary housing for a month or two, and maybe be able to get caught up on some back bills, or be able to pay for a phone that is such a vital necessity. It's interesting in the parable that Jesus tells about the laborers who worked all day and earned their money, were fairly angry that those who only worked maybe an hour got paid the same amount. And we sort of miss the gist of that story, in that the story is about God's generosity, and that God's generosity is really for all people. And I think that's one of the things that we try to live into here at Community Missions, that God's generosity is available for everyone, whether they're street homeless folk who are trying to get out of homelessness through the Haven and the Judah, as well as folks who are coming to Community Missions to help volunteer. And it's such a strong emphasis for the United Church of Christ and for Zion, you at Zion, who do such a wonderful job reaching out. So this is step one. Folks who are homeless can come in here in the winter, and we begin to build a relationship with those folk. And then, if they qualify, they can come over to the Haven. But again, this summer, we use this as an office to help about 40 people were able to get their stimulus check. We signed 85 people up, and some of those stimulus checks didn't come, or they've still kind of wrapped up in red tape. But we were also able to do census sign up for up to 80 folk. And that was, I think, a significant ministry we had here this summer. So let's leave the cold weather shelter and move over to the Haven, which is our next step into helping chronically homeless men become stable and permanent housing. I can actually show you one. That's Mama Kitty, and then that's Carl. And they can come out here and smoke and be outside. They've had a community garden that the guys take care of, and this is kind of the end of the harvest.
Oh, that's a big cat.
Mama Kitty doesn't like me because I took her to the vet, so...
Oh, no.
She's not my fan. Very few of the guys here have cars. Maybe none of them here. Well, one does. But many of them have bikes, so the bike rack is kind of empty right now, but many have bikes. This is Carl. Carl is one of the cats who live here at the Haven. He and Mama Kitty give our guys some peace. They take care of the cats, and they take care of our vegetable garden. And we have a little bit of a harvest here. And sometimes they'll take the grill and fire up the grill. They have their bikes, because that's how most of our men travel around, by bike or bus. Very few have cars. And this is our peaceful little patio. Guys can come out here and smoke cigarettes, because we're a smoke-free building. Hang out with Carl and Mama Kitty, and just sit and enjoy the evening. Again, we've had a nice little harvest here, though we're beginning to put the garden to bed. And this is part of how this place brings a bit of a safe haven for folks who lived out in the stress of homelessness. So it's a wonderful part of the Haven, having this little backyard, this little patio. And I think about the story, the parable of the laborers, and all the men here participate in the labor of keeping this place put together. They all have chores, and it's a part of what they can contribute. And I think part of that parable is that everyone has something to contribute. It may not be as many hours as another person. It may not be as glorious, perhaps, or well touted as somebody else. But we all have labor to give to the common good of the community. And I think part of what Jesus is telling us is that no matter what you contribute, you're part of the greater good of the laborers in the vineyard. But it's typical room. They each get a bed, they each get their own little closet, a little side thing. This is a leftover of a non-working TV, I think, that we'll have to deal with when somebody moves in. So it's pretty simple, but when you've been living on the streets or in a shelter or on a cot. Well, welcome back. We are now in the Haven, and we're in one of the rooms that we have here at the Haven. The Haven is the first step for men to leave chronic homelessness and enter into a more stable housing situation. And as you can see, this is one of 9 rooms we have here. This room houses 2 men. Each man has kind of a cubicle, so they have a bed, and they have their own closet and a nightstand. And it's the beginning of being able to get off the streets, be in a safe place, work with a caseworker to address any medical issues, mental health issues, social security issues, maybe look for work, but just take a breather from the stress of living out on the streets. And sometimes that's what we need as people seeking to do justice, is to give people a sanctuary, a safe haven that they can breathe a little bit for a little while. So this is a big step from being either living on the streets or in a tent encampment or in an abandoned home or even on a cot in a shelter. This is a little bit more private, a little bit more comfortable bed perhaps, and place to have some things hang up. So it's a good next step, and we work with the men here to help them begin to think about what the next steps of their life are going to be. And again, a church like Zion, who cares for the least of these, and a denomination like the United Church of Christ, who seeks justice, is part of the work that we do here as we seek to help people leave homelessness and get into some stability. Meal sharing. Meal sharing is a way for us to build relationships with folks here at the Haven. So this is our kitchen. It serves the men of the Haven and some of the men of the Judah. And we have church groups and other groups that come and prepare a meal. During COVID, of course, it's been a little bit challenging, so we always wear masks and we always wear gloves. But we have our groups that come in and prepare a meal and serve a meal and sit down and visit with the guys as they can build relationships with the folk. And it reminds me that one of the ways in which Jesus built relationships with folk was around a table. And his table was very inclusive. It included and welcomed all who wanted to be a part of the feast. This is the hallway of the Judah House, which comprises of 16 studio apartments for men who have been living at the Haven and who've gotten some stability and some independence, perhaps have some income from working or Social Security, and can come and be a little bit more independent by living in one of the apartments here. These are simple studio apartments with kitchenettes, their own bathroom. But again, when you think about the journey that the men who live here have been on, they've gone from living on the streets to maybe a shelter, to the Haven, and now their own apartment. And they haven't lived in that kind of independence for many of our men in many years. So this is a wonderful place for our men to be a part of. We are funded by HUD and CDBG money and United Way and donations of time, talent, and treasure from people who want to support this kind of ministry. And we are a ministry. We are permanent supportive housing for men. So that means that folks can stay here as long as it makes sense for them to stay here. Many of our men will move out into the larger community, into their own apartments where they're fully independent. But here they will continue to have support. It's permanent supportive housing. So we have case workers who will continue to work with the men and help them find stabilization and independence and a quality of life and a dignity of life.